to introduce you to our Eco-Chaplain Rev'd David Coleman. And over to you, David.
Okay, thank you very much, Judith. When I was at college, we began every Wednesday morning with, at that place, what was called Lutheran Matins. And we began with these words from one of this year's Creation Time readings, which is from Hebrews chapter 1. Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets. But in these last days, God has spoken to us by God's Son. If we're looking at the place of formal or shared prayer, music and liturgy, including hymnody, in the building of spiritual resilience, adaptation and mitigation in the life of our churches, in what is going to be turbulent times ahead, then that's a very useful perspective. Some of the things from many centuries before will be just what we need. All creatures of our God and King, the trees of the field will clap their hands. But now in these last days is not a time to salt away treasures or keep anything in reserve, nor to keep our distance from what mainstream Christian faith can offer. So we need encouragement in our faith, encouragement that is close to the earth, that takes notice of those who, like indigenous populations and the marginalized of all nations, may be closer, so that we learn, as it were, direct from Christ, connecting with our experiences, allowing us to bring what might seem very bad news into the sacred space of collective worship and private meditation, or indeed this hybrid space that we've learned to use online. Now, hymns and things like that have always been political poetry, lyric poems with a strong agenda, not just to address, but to shape and lead the praise of God. So we're not stopping singing, but we're delighting that those who sing pray twice. We are living the life of the churches and not just reinventing it. Before I say anything else, and for newcomers to our sessions, it might be useful to say just a little bit about the practicalities of my work as environmental chaplain and Eco-Congregation Scotland, which daily brings together the commitment of more than 500 congregations across Scotland, and indeed across an ecumenical spectrum. We are also up to our eyes in preparation for COP in November. This year, as we approach what's become a regular observance, Creation Time, Creation Tide, Season of Creation, whatever you want to call it, we're partnering with the Joint Public Issues team, which pulls together justice issues in the lives of the United Reformed Church, the Methodist Church and UK Baptist churches, with some participation from the Church of Scotland. As for the chaplaincy, first of all, what may come as a surprise is that I am not an environmental specialist. But the thing is, nor do you need to be. The job was open when I began it, and for my predecessor, open to general practice church leaders with experience of local church life. And there's no inconsistency there. So if your local leader says they don't have experience of environmental things in church, remind them pretty firmly and lovingly they have experience of the church, which, if you look closely, can be pretty green. I've been convinced in the last couple of years that in the global circumstances of our age, which are characterized by different priorities and awareness, everyday local church life is called to be positively environmental ministry. And that's a joy and a blessing as well as a challenge. Churches that choose green, as it were, deepen their faith and develop their fellowship. So although we're putting a lot of energy into special resources and events, and we're introducing some of those tonight, the next step after making environmental concerns visible in the life of the church is to make sure they end up mainstream, that they're everyday, that they're integrated, so that this green stuff is not just brought down from the mantle shelf once in a green moon, and so that a season of creation that we'll be entering in September is a training ground for every day. Start enjoying it, then carrying on with what you enjoy. So when we're gathering materials, we try and encourage the irritating activists to make, and also to make peace between them and the whole congregation, whose life, after all, stands to be enriched by letting the earth into worship. There are in our materials some things which are completely off the wall, and also things which look very, very conventional and formal, because that is what they are. And I'm sad that Andy Braunston, who's created a series of quite formal but very profound prayers for each week of creation time, is actually on holiday and can't be with us tonight, though there are several of our writers. Hello to Valerie, hello to Richard. I've seen you on the screen so far. Many ways, one faith, one world, though a common emphasis is our relationship with the earth as a who rather than an it, as a beloved relative, if I can paraphrase Pope Francis, as a relative rather than property, even God's property, to be loved rather than just looked after. Eco-Congregation Scotland is concerned with what it means to be a church in these urgently alarming days, rather than just filling gaps in a pulpit rota or any other sort of wider scheme that has gaps in it. That's why I hope what I have to say and what we're offering has some immediate bearing on the churches. It's not very often that I work with experimental fellowships. It's much more run-of-the-mill that you know, the church down the road, people who express an interest and maybe invite me or look up online what we've got to offer. And because from this point on, all the way through the season, what we're offering will be dynamic and changing and added to day by day. I want to say, keep coming back. See, and if what you need isn't there, either write it yourself and share it with us, film it, or give us a nudge and see what pops out, especially as the United Nations Climate Conference is on the horizon. It's not churchmanship that determines the level of your commitment. So whatever your own treasures in these last days, or what feel like the last days, bring them out. If you have reserves of spirituality, now's the time to squander them for the good of the earth, to the glory of God. I'm going to give you a bit of a flavour of some of the video and written material. Again, I've had to add voices sometimes where I haven't been able to pin down the people who wrote it, but this just gives you a flavour of the variety that we've got over the 5 weeks of the season. Here we go for a little bit of a screen share. Where's it gone? Right. I know what I've done. Sorry, friends. This is just because I'm using 2 screens and it's gone onto the other one. Right. Just one. Okay, just a moment. I'll be with you. This does happen to everyone now and then. There we go. Okay. Screen share. If I just close that, then open it again. There we are. Okay. Now, one more moment. There we are. Lovely. Here we go. What a way to launch out into a season where the quality of our faith is immediately and nakedly on show in the inconsistency, or shall we say unconformity, of our behaviour when we're confronted by inequalities at home in human cultures.
Do I love you when I burn my carbon every time I turn my car on and pour more petrol into the tank? Blanking out the plankton I'm killing, ozone layer I'm filling with toxic fumes, the plumes of smoke. Doom looms, and yet the lupins in the garden still bloom.
If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It's better for you to enter life maimed than to have 2 hands and go to Gehenna, to the unquenchable fire.
Climate crisis is like a cigarette. We know it would destroy us, but we do it anyway. It's convenient, it's consumed, it harms others around us. but we do it anyway.
Say to those who are fearful of heart,
Be strong.
do not fear.
He is our God. The eyes of the blind shall be opened.
The ears of the deaf unstopped.
For waters shall break forth in the wilderness,
And streams in the desert
The burning sand
shall become a pool.
and the thirsty ground
Springs of water.
Near me, where the chairs are cosy and the air conditioning is on. When the world heats up, it's cool to be cool, don't you know? Not like some sweaty labourer from the factory. Of course, I'm here to serve humanity over any of the lower creatures. After all, they're only here to serve us. Rather like the lower orders, really.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, sovereign of creation. For you have made the earth and the seas, the mountains and the stars. You set the planets in their place, yet made us in your very own image, causing us to strive for justice and do what is right. Blessed are you forever.
And saw that it was good. And that was only the start of what you have created trees to do. You designed an amazing chemical process, photosynthesis, to draw carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, to extract carbon to make trees grow, to create nutrients to replenish the soil, and return oxygen back into the atmosphere to enable all of your creatures to breathe. Through millennia, trees have held the soils, the hillsides, and rivers in their places, made habitats for diverse bugs and insects, and birds of the air.
Creator God, you love the world. You have fashioned a place of beauty, wonder, and abundance. And in love you have freely shared this world with us as a priceless gift for all to enjoy and treasure, as a place where we can thrive and flourish in loving relationship with you and with all of creation.
So worship is no place to hide. Holy ground is where you bring the difficult things. And for geologists, ground does not come much holier than where we are today.
The non-human players of creation communicate, act, enjoy the life which is their own. Only by acknowledging their personhood will we even begin to find our own place and purpose in the community and communion of creation. The skies declare God's glory, and the firmament shows God's handiwork. One day speaks their tale to another, and one night imparts knowledge to night. And though by us their speech is ignored, and though by us their voices go unheard, their broadcast, notwithstanding, fills the earth.
Do you have a favorite Bible passage that celebrates the wonder of God's creation? How connected do you feel to the rest of creation? Are there ways in which you could be more intentional about caring for creation?
Proverbs 31, 10-31. Is a passage that on first reading made me despair of finding the green thread, and yet, as a minimum, this passage looks to living a good life with available resources. So the capable wife would be part of a circular economy campaign, or running zero waste classes, instructing the young from the throwaway generation in making do and mending.
Here's a tree.
It's time
they grew. We breathe, we feed, we climb, we build. The tree was one with Christ, the cross, the vine, the branches, nations healing. Look at all the trees, says Jesus.
Here's a tree. It's time they grew. Here's a bird. It's time they flew.
With urgency and song and nesting, eggs and poultry feather bedding, flocks at sunset, insect eating. Look at all the birds, says Jesus.
Here's a bird. It's time they flew. Here's a fish.
It's time they swam. The oceans teem, or sadly empty, with warming and acidic surging. Currents fail and glaciers melt, but Jesus spoke to calm the waters. Here's a fish.
It's time to swim. Here's a bell.
It's time it rang. It's time we spoke the truth in love. It's time to sound an urgent note, to call injustice to account, to ring in ways to share the world. Here's a bell. Now ring it loud.
Here's a church whose time
has come to preach good news to every creature. Care for earth and sea and sky. Find our place and purpose, sharing Jesus, shepherding with love.
Here's a church whose time
has come. Let all be so. Amen.
Show me another way to show real love. Not just feel love, but real love. Earthy love, gritty love for the whole earth, and real grit. Show me how to love, oh God, and not just burn my carbon.
Now, let's find you again. There you are. Now, there's a whole heap of links that we could put into chat. You'll find ways to find the material that's being assembled. Again, you'll find ways to contribute to it on the Eco Congregation website and indeed on the Joint Public Issues website. We're launching things fairly formally in a couple of days' time on the 19th. But I think we can bung a few links into the chat, and you can track down some of the things that you've had a taster of in the last few minutes. Okay, that's the introduction to our project this year of Season of Creation. As I say, it's always else that you'd like to add in, as well as anything you'd like to ask for that may not yet be there. Over to Kathy, I think, next. All right, there you go.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. I want to begin with some words that somebody sent me just today. And these are words that were written more than 30 years ago, but they are words which really spoke very clearly and fervently to me today. Let me begin with prayer, that is, becoming conscious of our sense of precariousness, not only for ourselves. None of us has the solution to the world we tackle. None of us can offer a convincing program of action. The very word prayer suggests being conscious of our precariousness when we deal with such major issues. Not only the sense of our precariousness, also of the precariousness of the situation where we live, of this moment, which is our moment in time and history. I am here representing the Iona community particularly, and particularly the environmental concerns network of the community. And it's a group of about upwards of 40 people now, members and associates of the Iona community from 4 continents. And we began to meet last year, and we met, of course, online. And when we came together, many of us have been involved with environmental justice in one way or another for decades. And we wanted to look at how we could work together to further our commitment and address our climate emergency. And the first thing and in fact, the thing that particularly spoke to me from these words I've just read to you was the reminder of our precariousness and the fact that we are created. We are part of creation. We have not always been very good at recognizing both our createdness, that we are not ultimately the creator, we are the created, but also that we are created along with the rest of creation. We are a species among species, and we are interdependent, and we are tied up with the health of the whole creation. And the COVID pandemic this year and last year has really made visible to us how greatly we are interdependent in our world, not just with other human beings, but with other species with whom we share creation. As members of the Iona community, we share a common rule. We work for justice and peace, wholeness and reconciliation in our localities, in our society, and in the whole creation. Looking at what we could do together, the COP26, rescheduled from last year to this autumn in Glasgow, presented itself as an opportunity. The base of the Iona community is in Glasgow and has been for 80 years. And already faith communities in Scotland and the rest of the UK were seeking ways to become involved. The Iona community has, as part of its raison d'etre, the renewal of worship, and worship has always been a strong focus in the life of the community. Not just the worship in its in its performative sense, but worship as the prayer that helps us to recognize our precariousness. And who could watch on television as Afghans queue up at the airport to leave an incredibly precarious situation, or watching people in Haiti having once again to pick up the pieces after disaster and not be aware of the precariousness and our need for that prayer. And so we were trying to think about ways in which across the world, we could make a contribution that reflected the nature of who we are and our concerns. And we know, partly from years and years of trying to do it, some of the challenges of getting our churches and faith communities to engage with the creation, and in particular with the climate emergency as part of its liturgical practice and its life as a community. And we know from people who have a wide experience that it's not always easy to get people in churches and to get worship leaders to engage with worship reflecting our being in creation. Part of our intuition was that this is often because people don't know where to start, and they don't know how to start engaging with the texts of scripture, but also with the songs and hymns, with prayers and so on, and to really link that to people's own stories from their own locations and from their own activism. So we decided so that certainly nobody in the Iona community, and hopefully beyond that, would have an excuse not to really visit the creation perspective and the precariousness of where we are. They would have no excuse to do that if we could help with this. And so we decided to put together a book which would follow the lectionary from the 1st of September until the last Sunday of the Christian year. And that we would do this recognizing that churches across the world use the lectionary, and that it's something that we share, it's something that binds us together, that across, week by week, we share scriptural texts with people in very, very different situations. And it was our conviction that God is always speaking through the Gospels, through the and through the other texts of the Bible, and that we all and that word always comes to us as a part of creation. And so our book, which is called Living Faithfully in the Time of Creation, was born. And it doesn't just cover the 5 weeks of the creation season. It covers these weeks from now till the end of the Christian year. Because our conviction is that now the time of creation has to be more than 5 weeks out of the year. It has to be, we are living in the time of creation, and the time of the focus on creation. And so we invited contributions from our network and from people in and friends of our purpose in the wider community. And so the book contains, first of all, lectionary reflections for the Sunday readings from the 15th Sunday after Pentecost onwards. And they're not they're just the standard lectionary. We used the Revised Common Lectionary, which is widely used, which is actually very similar to Church of England, the Anglican lectionary, and the Catholic lectionary. And so each lectionary reflection has the passages or an extract of the passages, and then a reflection by an experienced contributor, an experienced worship leader and preacher, and a suggestion, a question for further reflection, a suggestion for action, and a prayer. And these vary very widely. I think the diversity of them is part of what really speaks. They're about food and how we grow food, how we distribute it, who gets it, and how we share it. It's about forests. It's about mountains. It's about, it comes from Scotland, it comes from Wales, from England, from Germany, from Jerusalem, from Brazil. Very challenging reflections, some of them, asking us to consider what we understand by the use of the word conquering and conquest. We are often encouraged to conquer this, that, and the next thing. Conquest is not such an easy concept in many parts of the world. So there are lectionary reflections, and then there are a series of 12 essays from people in the burning parts of Australia, in Kenya, in the Rift Valley, and in North America, on the Gulf Coast, in northern New York. So all of these reflect something of the reality of people's own situations, where they are called to be active, and the suggestions of the kinds of things that people might be able to do. And these range from very local, very personal, to engaging at a national and international level. So we hope that everybody will find an idea somewhere in these things that they can, ways in which they can express that prayer. And so some people are well-known climate activists, Alistair McIntosh, for example. Others are people raising families, doing jobs in very local situations. And then after the essays, there's a section of additional liturgical material, prayers, meditations, reflections of intercessions, and that invites people to use them in their worship, in their worship planning. There's a section on songs and hymns. Many of these come from the Wild Goose Resource Group, many but not all, and many of them are sung to very well-known tunes. Sometimes they're familiar tunes, familiar hymn tunes with new words that reflect the time of creation. There's a big section on good links and organizations to be engaged with, suggestions around the world, and finally, well, last but not least, there's a full liturgy entitled God's Good Earth, written by John Bell and Joe Love from the Wild Goose Worship Group. And that is a full order, along with suggestions for songs, a meditation that if people want to do have a Climate Sunday service, and they can add in their own petitions and so on in that, this is something that they'll be able to do. So it's really just a way to help people live more deeply into prayer, and live into the kind of the real depth of reflection, of prayer that we need, and that will allow us both to listen and to hear the voices that speak to us from many parts of the world, and that invite us to respond to that call to live faithfully in the time of creation from where we are. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it might be over to me now.
I think it is, Wendy.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for the opportunity for sharing this evening, and just to participate in such an inspiring range of resources that we've already heard about. And I hope what I contribute is quite complementary. I work for Christian Aid, as you'll know, I'm sure from the literature that went out beforehand. My role is focused on faith content, so worship resources, prayer resources, Bible study, sermon notes, across the sort of range of church resources. And I expect that many of you will be familiar with Christian Aid's campaigning on climate justice. And certainly there's plenty to talk about, but this focus tonight is on the worship resourcing for climate justice. And I'm very happy to show you some of that content. And most of it is for across the year, as opposed to specific for Creation Tide or Season of Creation. And certainly it's all been created with an orientation towards the Conference of the Parties, COP26 in Glasgow. But just a little bit of background to that content, and I suppose Christian Aid's journey, and my own journey with Christian Aid around climate justice. And you'll notice I'm using the language of climate justice. When I first came to Christian Aid, which was back in 2008, Christian Aid had just really begun its climate justice campaigning in 2007 with a Cut the Carbon March. And that set off from Bangor in Northern Ireland, where I'm from originally, and a group of people from all over the world walked down through they didn't walk across the water, they did get the ferry, and they walked down through Scotland and down through England to 10 Downing Street with a petition and really demanding for the carbon emissions of United Kingdom to be cut. And they had shoelaces, and I was drawn into the climate justice campaigning through that Cut the Carbon March before I came to Christian Aid, and was quite involved with a campaign in Northern Ireland around that. I moved to Scotland to work for Christian Aid, and there's been a number of, I would say, ideas shared in terms of climate justice that have really stuck with me since 2007 and 2008. Many of you, I'm sure, will remember the Make Poverty History marches. And quite early in my time with Christian Aid, and I'm really grateful to work for Christian Aid and for an organisation focused on eradicating poverty, overcoming injustice. But the phrase that really stuck with me, and I think it was from a colleague in Niger, said, "Forget about making poverty history. Climate change is making poverty permanent." And so when Christian Aid is approaching climate change, it's approaching it from that perspective of climate change is making poverty permanent. And as an organisation that seeks to mobilise, equip, empower communities of Christian faith particularly to eradicate poverty, to overcome poverty, to challenge the injustice that causes it, then we cannot neglect the effect of climate change on poverty. So that forget about making poverty history, climate change is making poverty permanent was something that really registered with me in terms of Christian Aid's focus on this issue. And then more recently, so in my time with Christian Aid, there's been actually three theology pieces that have been written specifically around climate justice. The one was called All Creation Groaning, based on the Romans 8 passage. And then in, I think it was 2011, there was or maybe 2012, there was a paper written called Song of the Prophets, a global theology of climate change. And what Song of the Prophets did that All Creation Groaning hadn't done was it listened more attentively to the voices of those who were living with the experience of climate change in that detrimental sense in terms of poverty being made permanent. It listened to the voice of Global South theologians. And 2 years ago, we revised Song of the Prophets, a global theology of climate change, updating some of the stories and some of the voices in that. And if anything, updating it to convey the sense of urgency that we all sense and feel, I expect, in this space this evening around the issue of climate justice. And the justice angle, the other, so the forget about making poverty history, climate change is making poverty permanent was a sort of first step into this issue. The second phrase that really registered and certainly has been one that Christian Aid has said over and over and over in terms of climate change is that those who are most affected, and perhaps most effective, but those who are most affected have done the least to cause the problem. And while Christian Aid's focus is on humanitarian relief and challenging the causes of poverty and a focus on humanity, there is a recognition in this conversation this evening that actually, in terms of creation and the damage to creation as a whole, including humanity, we do need that holistic approach. But with Christian Aid's focus primarily on poverty and on affected communities, then those who are most affected doing the least to cause the problem, then that's a justice issue. So climate justice has certainly been very much our approach to this. And then the third idea that's, I suppose, is a precursor to this content that I'll share with you is one that's taken from the Song of the Prophets, a global theology of climate change. Certainly not written in it for the first time. It's quoted, or words from our chair, Dr. Rowan Williams, where he says, we need to regain a sense that our relationship with the earth is about communion and not consumption. I'll say that again. We need to regain a sense that our relationship with the earth is about communion, not consumption. So that's a little bit of my own personal sort of journey with Christian Aid in terms of Christian Aid's own journey with climate change and climate justice, moving from an understanding of climate change as making poverty permanent, recognizing that it's a justice issue, those most affected have done the least to cause the problem, and then, well, what can we do about it? And there's something in the solution, not saying it's the entire solution, but there's something, I would say, in what we've heard already this evening, and hopefully what I communicate in this time with you, about retrieving our sense as creature and retrieving our sense of communion, and in that challenging the consumption that has perpetuated the problem of climate change. So I want to share my screen, so bear with me for a second till I get the right page up. And I'm hoping I'm going to look to Judith to give me a thumbs up to let me know if that's correct. Great. Okay, so hopefully you'll see before you the relevant page on the Christian Aid website. And if there's one link that I could share with you, it's this one, christianaid.org.uk/pray. So what I'll demonstrate or display with you in the next few minutes, you can find in this space. So christianaid.org.uk/pray. And when you arrive at that page, you'll see it right at the top in relation to all of our resources to do with COP26, Worship and Pray for Climate Justice. I talked at the beginning about the Cut the Carbon March in 2007. There is a pilgrimage has already begun to COP26, and it's the Young Christian Climate Network, which I'm sure some of you, if not all of you, will be aware of. and they are on a relay or a pilgrimage from the G7 talks that happened in June in Cornwall, and they're walking to Glasgow on a pilgrimage for climate justice. And you can find more out about that, but something about the significance of walking and pilgrimage and being in creation, I think, is itself a bearing witness. But it's the get resources part that I want to take us to this evening. So when you arrive on the pray page, you'll see the pledge to pray. That'll take you to the journey with the young pilgrims. And if you get resources, you'll see we have two pages at the moment of resources to help inform worship and prayer in the lead up to COP. But these resources are certainly going to be of use beyond COP, I expect, and will need to be modified in the light of whatever decisions do come out of those talks in October and November. I'm not going to go through them all. I just want to flag up the ones quite specific for worship, as tonight's focus is on worship. And I'll start with the order of service, the Song of the Prophets. You've heard me talk about the theology resource that was written a number of years ago and then revised more recently. And this Song of the Prophets order of service was really informed by that paper. I'll not go through it in great detail with you, but I'll just give you an overview of the structure and share one of the prayers with you. There's a bit of sort of preamble in terms of setting up for the service. It's not particularly conventional in terms of an order of service. It does include elements of a conventional order of service, but it's structured slightly differently. As I said at the start, we haven't tailored our resources specifically to a season of creation, the recognition being, as Kathy said, that, well, we need to prioritize this all year round. And so we've suggested when else you maybe could use this order of service if you did want to focus on issues of climate justice at other seasons and times of the year. And it's divided into 4 sections. After we do the call to worship and prayer of approach, we have 4 voices in this order of service that we wanted to amplify. And the first voice is that of the earth. And we've drawn out from, I think Sam already mentioned this evening, and some of the wonderful resources that David profiled at the start from Psalm 96, and started with in the part of the earth, focusing on a prayer of lament. And again, I think a lot of us have rediscovered or are rediscovering, if it had perhaps lapsed somewhat, the value of lament in terms of our processing and engaging in prayer around issues of many issues: COVID, climate justice, conflict. And so we thought it was really appropriate to bring a prayer of lament into this order of service. The second part is that of young people. And we asked some young people to help us shape this part of the service, and an all-age talk that is linked to from it, and included, where we could, the voices of young people from across the world. And that takes us into our prayer of confession and absolution. And part 3, we look at the prophetic voices of the Bible, and particularly at Micah 6. Very, very common for Christian Aid to use Micah 6 verse 8. What is the Lord your God?
I think we seem to have temporarily lost Wendy there. I don't know what's happened to her internet.
I wonder if we could just pick up what she was saying. If you go back a couple of verses from what she was mentioning, you find that the earth and creation is a witness to the justice and injustice of humanity. And so, you know, what we've used so often as simply a justice-related passage is actually a climate justice, a creation justice related one. I bet you when she comes back, she's going to say that.
Apologies. I have a very temperamental Ethernet cable, and I think it has let me down. Thank you very much. So you'll get the gist. The order of service has 4 states, 4 voices. The 4th verse, just to finish that off, is a prophetic voice of communities experiencing climate injustice. So when I talked earlier about our theology, the Song of the Prophets, being reshaped and informed by global voices, that's certainly been, I hope, a thread through all of these resources, that we're particularly keen to amplify and listen to those voices and learn from those voices in terms of how we can restore our relationship as creature and in communion rather than in as consumers. I just want to quickly go through a couple more, just slightly less conventional resources. Again, I'll share my screen just to make sure you can recognize them when you go to explore yourself. Hopefully you can see that. Is that okay, Judith? Great. I'll take us to the River of Prayer resource, which is really a creative prayer resource. It could be set up in a number of different ways, and my internet opens it. There we go. It's set up something like a prayer stations resource, but we were very conscious of COVID when we created this, and so we've made suggestions of how it could be set up even outside in terms of helping people to engage with the themes that are explored. And we follow a river from the source to its mouth, and each section of the river, I used to teach geography, I'm afraid, so there's a wee bit of my geography teaching influence coming into this. We follow through the source, the upper course, the middle course, the lower course, and then to the mouth of the river. And so we've journeyed from quite a meditative place at the source, where we want to reflect on our relationship with God, be refreshed and restored as we set out on this journey towards justice. In our upper course, we're thinking about the energy that we can harness in the world, and that those prophetic words from Amos that you will be familiar with, let justice roll on like a river, and reflect on the power of renewable sources of energy in that stage of the river. Then we get down to the middle course, and we're thinking more about the fruitfulness and how things can be transformed, listening in this part to the prophet Ezekiel. And then we move into the lower course, where we're thinking about abundance and fruitfulness and how things can be changed. But the mouth is the final stage of the river, and the recognition that for that abundance, for that fruitfulness to be realized, then we need to amplify our own voices, even using the metaphor of the mouth from the river to open our own mouths. I think time is probably gone. Just to give you time for discussion, just a signpost, you'll see some sermon notes based on some apocalyptic passages of scripture, as well as prophetic passages. And if I just go on to the second page, if it goes, our most recent resource in this space is an outdoor service guide, which, as it says, is a guide to having a service outdoors, and provides some suggestions for how you might engage with some psalms in an outdoor space, something like what we've already seen demonstrated in David's films, but also drawing our attention to our own breath, and how much we share with creatures and brothers and sisters across the world. So just a little flavour of some of the resources that are there already. We're going to be adding to them in the lead up to COP and beyond. So thank you so much for letting me do a whistle-stop tour of some of the resources that Christian Aid currently has on offer for a variety, I hope, of worship contexts. And I'm on hand as well if folk want any help finding those resources. It's Wendy Lloyd, W. Lloyd at christianaid.org.uk. Thank you so much. Back to you, David.
Well, probably Judith, since she's the sort of host.
Oh, Judith.
That's great. Thank you very much to all our three speakers tonight. You've given us an awful lot to think about and lots to process and kind of work our way through. What we're going to do for the next sort of 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so is we're going to put you into breakout groups. So you're going to get a little sign coming up on your screen very shortly asking you if you would like to join in with a breakout group. And we've got 3 questions that you might like to consider discussing when you're in that group. So the first one is around what jumped out and got you excited from our speakers this evening and the resources that they've shared. What resources or practices on the creation environment themes have you found really useful in your home congregations? And what further resources or practices would you find would be useful and helpful to grow that engagement within your congregation and within your worship? So I'm just going to pop the 3 questions into the chat for you there, and you'll have those when you go into your breakout rooms. And we should be able to pop you into your breakout rooms any second now. You should get a little invite to join a breakout room. There's still a few of you here, so I'm just wondering, have you managed to get your little invitation coming up on your screen? If not, have a look down where it says breakout rooms on the bottom part of your screen, and you should be able to click on that and it should allow you to join from there. No, everybody else is just coming. We've got 30 seconds more in their room, so I think they're just finishing up their conversations. And
I see Helen there. Hello, Helen.
Hello, Edith. I can't actually. Oh, there you are. There you are on my screen. I couldn't see you before. I did see you earlier when I first came in.
Yeah. Speak to you tomorrow sometime.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the joys about these events. You spot all sorts of people that you recognise.
Well, we go to the same church. Helen and I go to the same church.
Welcome back, everybody. It's great to have you back in. What we're going to do for the next little while is we're just going to allow you, really open the floor to you folk and let you tell us what you're talking about, and maybe ask some questions if you've got questions for our speakers. If I can ask you though at the moment, if you mute yourselves until you're actually asking a question, that would be really good.
Okay.
The feedback between all the computers. But if you want to put hands up or just go for it. Go on then, Anthea. I can see you waving at me. You need to unmute though.
We had just the most amazing conversation, because one of my biggest worries, and the rest of us, is that church people are not taking notice really of what we're saying, because they're so into their little nitty-gritty things and problems. And they, well, certainly in 2 churches that I know very well, they're not taking everything seriously. And now then someone will say, oh, well, what about Afghanistan? And you go, there won't be an Afghanistan if we don't sort climate change out. But the 4 of us were very concerned about this.
And did you come to some sort of ideas about how you might move things on for people?
Well, yes, we were going to ask everybody else, how can we get other people to take this seriously?
Okay, so we've got a huge panel here, so I don't know if one of our speakers tonight wants to go for that, or if it's somebody else in the audience that's got some wisdom to add to that.
Can I say something?
Sure, Andrew. Yes, on you go.
I mean, in our group, we mentioned that it is sometimes difficult to convince people that their small efforts can make a difference. It can be all sorts of things like consuming, less water or changing little eating habits. But people tend to live in a little bubble saying, well, I'm only one individual in a population of 8 billion. It doesn't make a difference, but we have to convince people that small efforts do make a difference.
If they're done by lots of people.
Well, exactly.
There's that, and if you are in a church community, remember we have this culture of engaging in an activity called prayer, which is offered to God as a change of your own life to change you, but it's also just put into God's hands to do good in whatever way God wishes. We can't measure it, but we are convinced by and large, and this is a great part of this culture we have, that prayer is worthwhile. All these small things that we can do are prayer. I just say are, they're not like, they are. Think of it that way. Give it that sort of spiritual status and value. And that actually might also be rather encouraging.
Thank you, David. If I could speak just really briefly to the comment that was made in terms of, people will bring up other concerns that seem more pressing and more urgent, and the particular one about Afghanistan. I think that, that's on the screens, people are hearing it, and it triggers their compassion and their concern. And one of the things I think it's really important to remember is none of these things sit in isolation. So yes, it's conflict that seems to be the problem, but actually climate change, climate justice issues are rife in Afghanistan. Christian Aid's partners are having to help communities on the brink and already in famine because of climate change in Afghanistan. Afghanistan communities have had a horrendous time with COVID. So while it is the urgent issue, climate change is interwoven with all of these problems and challenges. So yes, Afghanistan, but let's not overlook the fact that Afghanistan is also affected by climate change right now. People are going hungry that shouldn't be going hungry. This is a pressing humanitarian issue, if that's what really gets people's compassion.
Yes, Wendy, I was going
to also say, oops.
Sorry.
Can I come in, or yes? No. I was just going to say that we've got a great example of how important individual actions are in the whole COVID situation, because COVID knows no boundaries and climate change knows no geographical boundaries either. And just as how individuals in this country and throughout the world have to wear the masks and do individuals need to do things to make a global change. The global depends on the local.
Thank you, Elaine. Agatha, you've got your hand up. Would you like to come in next?
Yeah, talking about climate change, but at the moment there are really little awareness of climate refugees, and even United Nations criteria on refugees and asylum status has not included a clause that allows nations to give refugee status to people due to climate change. And there's a lot of really horrendous climate disasters, as we are seeing in Haiti, which is really displaces people, or even like the recent fire in Greece.
That's a superb point, Agatha, really, yeah.
A dear friend of mine yesterday wrote a beautiful poem stimulated by the crisis in Afghanistan, and the focus of the poem is how we're all connected and should care for creation, and I've put a link to it in the chat box.
Thank you for that, Rhoda. We'll enjoy having a look at that.
I live in Belgium, and as many of you will know, we've had some horrendous floods recently, and we have really, for the first time, thousands of people who are now homeless because of climate change. So it's coming home to all of us. I mean, these are climate change refugees, and in Germany as well, and in Italy and in Greece from the fires. So we're now beginning to feel the impact in Europe.
Barry, you've got your hand up as well.
Me?
Yes, Barry. Yeah.
Hi. We were talking in our Bible study about Creation Climate Sunday, and as a result, I wrote a prayer called, well, I called it the tree prayer. One of the things I built into it was a number of ideas which have a therefore. Things like the leaves of the trees are for the healing of the nations. But first of all, we must learn how to use all that resources and spend a lot more time, because if we cut down trees, a lot of the healing of diseases will stop because it won't be there anymore. And I also built in the word photosynthesis. That is a word which anybody who hasn't had a geographical scientific background will not recognize. And it is a process designed by God to make things work. And I remember once I was talking to people from what was then the Forestry Commission. They understood it perfectly. But there's so many people I know of who've never even heard of it. So a lot of the language which we use, including carbon footprint, is still not generally understood. And until, and we can go, I mean, I've been going on about this for years, but until some of these ideas get a wider understanding, a lot of people is just going to wash over a lot of people who are not going to say, therefore, what must I do about it?
I think I'd like to respond to that by, again, getting back to the idea of relating to other people, other creatures, because, you know, we know how to get to know a person. We've got that skill by and large, but if you use that skill to get to know creation, then jargon or no jargon, you're going to start thinking differently about the environment you're in. So, you know, moving away from the it to who. And for that, you don't actually need any technical terms at all. You need the humanity you've got. But at the same time, it's interesting that, you know, the scientific terminology is helping us hear what the Earth is saying, putting it that way.
Yes, Edith.
Hello. In my little group, there were only two of us, and we were both Episcopalians, which is rather funny. But the services, we're quite formal in our framework of services, so it can be quite awkward. So I went on to think about how could we do something different, and we're all heading up for a harvest, and I wondered if an outdoor service, like on the church doorstep, bring out the harvest gifts and have a service like that on the church doorstep. And also, what this year is our harvest going to be? Is it going to be fruit and veg or things for the food bank, or is it going to be litter the rubbish we accumulate, the way we misuse creation. So, and I think if churches could take that kind of thing up, it would mean that we could say to people, my church, in my church, we're collecting litter this week to bring to our harvest service. And it would raise awareness that way, a simple way of saying to your neighbour, well, I'm collecting rubbish this week, I'm collecting litter this week, even if it's just a crisp packet or a face mask. It's something that we could do. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Super idea. It's amazing what reading one resource will spark as well. It's the idea.
And also, I thought the Christian Aid Wall of Hope, I'm going to explore that, because that's a simple way of bringing it to the congregation who aren't perhaps interested. But if we could do something like that, that sounds a possibility rather than preaching at people. End of sermon. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to Val.
Yeah, hi. David's just put a message on the chat about the new resources from the Scottish Episcopal Church for using throughout the season of creation. And what I was waving at the screen was the liturgy for daily prayer, and there's also fantastic resources for intercessions. And the idea is to use this liturgy throughout the season from the 5th of September through to Harvest Sunday on the 3rd of October. And there was another resource also that we talked about in our group, which is a really good one, which is Season of Creation website stuff, and it's 2021 Celebration Guide, A Home for All. So that sort of addresses some of the issues around homelessness and refugees and people who are asylum seekers. But there's some really lovely stuff in that guide for people if they want to. But certainly the Episcopal Church has got a lot of stuff going on for the whole season from the 5th of September.
Some other ideas to explore there. Anne, you've got a hand up, Anne Sparks.
Oh, I was thinking about these climate refugees, but as each country is being affected one after another in different ways, fire or flood or drought or whatever, just wondering where the refugees are actually going to go.
That is a very good question, and I don't think any of us are going to have an answer for you tonight, I'm afraid.
I think that one of the things that we can be sure of is that the vast bulk of them will go to countries that are already very poor, already affected. You know, they'll go to the refugees from Afghanistan. The majority of them will go to Pakistan, they'll go to Iran, they'll go to, I mean, Iran already has 1 million refugees living within its borders. You know, I think we think, and this is, I think, one of the most concerning things about climate justice is that you know, we're very concerned about our own borders, but actually we do so actually relatively little compared to countries like Lebanon, you know, with its own terrible crisis, receiving vast numbers of refugees. So I think, you know, it's also like the vaccines, also like the climate emergency. As Wendy says, you know, the people who have done the least in creating these situations are the ones who suffer the most. And I think that there's a real concern. I mean, Gordon Brown was writing about this today, that is our reaction simply going to be replicated, you know, in the kind of fortress Europe, that we try and protect ourselves at the expense of other people, and recognize from Afghanistan, from COVID, that this is not possible. We are all tied up in one creation. And what we do to the creation, we do to ourselves. And if not to ourselves, then to our children and our grandchildren. I don't know how anybody who's got children and grandchildren cannot really, you know, feel that they must take action. What kind of a world do we create for our grandchildren? Do we leave to our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren otherwise?
Wendy, is there anything else from a Christian Aid point of view from the things that you've seen?
In terms of the migration?
Migration.
Yeah, well, you know, I often reflect on, you know, there's a piece, Christian Aid 75 this year, and on our 50th anniversary, published a report. I think it was 50th or 60th. It was certainly over 15 years ago, probably 25 years ago, a report called The Human Tide, and made mention in that about the mass movement of people as a result of a combination of factors such as conflict, but also climate emergency. And I hear it in this group as well. It's you know, I think it's why these groups are so important, is bringing people together who have been saying this stuff for years, who've been campaigning and advocating and lobbying and worshipping on this stuff, and trying to be heard, and really just, as has been done, is helping equip each other to do that as best we possibly can. With the difference being, as I think has been mentioned, is that people are beginning to wake up who hadn't maybe previously been, because circumstances are forcing them to do so. And I guess, you know, the Wall of Hope was mentioned as one of Christian Aid's prayer resources for climate justice. And yeah, we could talk probably for another 2 hours on hope and the role of hope in the face of climate chaos or climate emergency or climate justice, as I've used the phrase. But we are people of faith, and people as part of creation are incredibly tenacious and are incredibly resilient. You know, for every compassionate, heart-wrenching story that we see on the news tonight about Afghanistan, there are communities who are having to dig deep yet again, but they have the resource in community to do that. So coming together as communities, connecting with creation and being part of creation, and turning our hope towards the Creator, it's what I need to do. And I think it's probably why we're all in this space tonight, in the hope that we can, in hope and faith and trust and love, make another world possible. I know that wasn't your question, Judith. You've sent me off on a preach, but yeah, that's, I guess, Christian Aid and my final word on that.
No, it was a good place to go, that's for sure. I'm very aware that we're hitting our 9 o'clock time, and we said we would sort of stop around 9 o'clock. Before we all set off, though, I want to show you the front cover of Kathy's book. So I'm just going to share my screen just to give you a wee taste of what this front cover looks like. So you know, when you go to Amazon or you go to a bookshop, you know what you're looking for. Okay, so whichever bookshop you choose to go to, this is the book that you are on the hunt for. Living Faithfully in the Time of Creation.
And the beautiful cover photograph is actually one that was taken by David Coleman, and it's of a mountain hare, and he took it on the slopes of a mountain somewhere in Scotland.
The cobbler.
The cobbler, yeah.
So we can share the ISBN number with you if you like having that for using for the bookshop, so we can make sure that you can get that.
Or you can just get it directly from Iona Books. I've put the link in the chat.
Brilliant. So just a final word is to remind you that we've got another one of these evenings coming up in a week and a half's time on the Thursday night. Creation Calls the Tune Part 2, which has got much more focus around music and music from all over the world. It's Ian McClarty from the Church of Scotland and Joel Payne from Resound Worship and John Bell from the Iona Community. So we'll get a big mixture of different kinds of music from them and lots of things hopefully to inspire our singing to come out of that. So
could I just say that it comes up an Eventbrite as being Thursday, the August the 19th.
Oh, that's a bit odd.
Because I thought, I can't do that.
It's a different event.
It's a different event.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
On this Thursday, David is going to be doing a launch for his Creation Tide resources. So if you want to come along on Thursday evening at 7:30, we'd be delighted to invite you along to that as well and hear a bit more about what's going to be going into those resources and the range of resources that are there. But we'll hopefully see you all again in a week and a bit's time, if not before, and go well this evening. I think, David, would you like to just round us off with a wee word of prayer?
That and a wee story. And the wee story is I was by a river recently and there was this gentleman and he was looking over at a gunboat. And he said, "Oh, isn't that wonderful? That'll keep all those refugees out."
Oh my God.
And I disagreed with him and walked away and left him to that. So I'm not suggesting that we all go up and punch the nose of somebody who's being objectionable, but that, okay, let's pray. Dear God, as we come into the strange circumstances of our world, as we move amongst people who, like us, need to change, give us courage and hope and cheerfulness to say what it is for us to say and to be what it is for us to be. Amen.
Thank you. And thank you so much for coming along tonight. We'll see you soon.